While everyone is moaning about a dead duck leader and an uninspiring opposition in this country, over on the other side of the pond, they wish they weren't dealing with lunatics, because Donald Trump's hush money trial stepped up a notch yesterday when the hushie, Stephanie Clifford, aka Stormy Daniels, took the stand. Now, this was a move that quite surprised Trump's lawyers. They were not expecting it to happen that day. They had about 5 minutes notice, no time to prepare. And what she had to say was pretty dramatic. Now, can you take us through this, Jeremy? Because, you know, she ain't hushing up no more, is she? What did she say?
I mean, she, as they say, the devil's in the detail, and she gave a very, very vivid account of their sexual encounter at a golf tournament, which he denies, and he just categorically denies it, but she gave all this detail about him being in silk pajamas and then getting changed and then putting his boxer shorts on, mentioning his daughter, which was really toe-curl, and saying that, you know, he was reminded of his daughter before they slept together. Her embarrassment at it as well, which I thought was equally kind of plausible, if you know what I mean. So
I think it was really grim, and she wished she hadn't been anywhere near it.
Yeah, and you know, you sort of think, right, what's in this for her? Because it's highly embarrassing even for a porn star to admit that she slept with Donald Trump. So
is it?
For me, anyway, it had the ring of truth really in what she said. Her account, I thought, was very plausible. He was deeply embarrassed by it. He was warned again because he was swearing and shaking his head all the time. But I mean, an absolute car crash for Donald Trump. An absolute car crash. It's almost impossible to imagine that in an English context. Can you imagine something as toe-killing as that happening just prior to an election? This man wants to be president, and you're listening to a porn star giving a vivid account of their sexual encounters. It's almost impossible to contemplate, really.
Yeah, I can't imagine it happening for either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. I can kind of picture something not a million miles away if it were Boris Johnson. But luckily, we haven't been subjected to it. So one of the things that basically this is all the detail that Trump admits he paid to not let the world hear, right? This is all the stuff. He spent 130 grand not letting people hear this, and now he's spending millions and people are hearing it. Jennifer says, in a way, I believe her because he's being too defensive. Of course it happened. But does it matter? I suppose, Jennifer. So one of the things that he said was that she said was that when they were sort of chatting, as she got to his suite, he said that you're very blonde and very intelligent. You remind me of my daughter. Shortly before they were at it. Now, some of the details they really weren't allowed to say. So Stephanie has told her story a few times, including various references describing Trump's genitalia and so on, which I'm not going to go into here, but you can Google it, folks, if you're that desperate. But they were intervening constantly about the detail that she was coming out with. They objected to the court learning that Trump had told Stormy he and Melania, his wife, didn't share a bed. They objected to the fact she claimed to have swatted his bum with a rolled-up magazine with his face on the cover. They objected to her discussing the position they had sex in, which, just FYI, was the most boring position. It's this kind of detail, exactly the detail that he tried to hush up with a $130,000 check, Jeremy. Is that going to damage the case, do you think? Because, I mean, the case isn't about any of this stuff, is it? The case is about whether he pretended the money was for something else.
Well, there's a very serious point to it, though, isn't there? Because obviously he did it prior to an election in which he was elected president. So the key issue, really, if you take a step back, is would this detail, had it been made public prior to the election, meant that he lost the election? Now, you can't say whether that's true or not, but that's the key issue in terms of the court case, and what he's covered up and how he's done it illegally. It's the old cliche, isn't it? The cover-up's always worse than the actual deed in many ways, and that's what he's being done for. Now, no one can make a judgment on that, but there is a really cogent argument that says it is germane and it is important because, that, as you just rightly pointed out, it's not just about the fact that's what he was trying to cover up. It's the fact that he did cover it up, and it didn't come out prior to an election, and that could have influenced the most important election in their calendar, i.e., the race to be president. And it's really quite ironic, isn't it? There are many very amusing aspects to it, but the fact that it could ruin his chances of becoming president this time around is a really strange dynamic in this, isn't it? Because what you've just said, it worked first time around, but it hasn't worked second time around. The even more bizarre thing about this is whether it makes any difference to his running for president, because there are many, many, many people who just vote for him anyway, which I find even more extraordinary in many ways.
Yeah, it's a bit like Al Capone being done for tax avoidance.
It is.
And then sort of, there being a ban afterwards and him setting up any legitimate businesses. Legitimate businesses weren't the issue, were they? So Mike says, if Trump is still elected after being found guilty of illicit payments to a porn star, does this make him the people's champignon? We're not going to discuss that, Mike, because it's still early. I'm still digesting my Frosties. Go away. So one of the things that they're talking about here is whether or not this really damages Trump's position with the electorate. What do you think, everybody? Would you still vote? Are there any Americans out there? Did you vote Trump last time? Would you vote for him this time? Michael Elias said Trump should be prevented from standing for president. Unfortunately, the founding fathers who wrote the Constitution in the US didn't imagine they would ever have to deal with a Trump, as they didn't put this in the small print. It does perhaps need some kind of a codicil to the some kind of amendment to the Constitution to cater to this kind of thing. Steve says, morning, Steve, how can the US still consider him for president? Guilty or not of all he's accused of, can he ever be trusted to control the nuclear arsenal? Can he ever be trusted to control his tiny hands and any other sort of smaller parts of his anatomy? It is astonishing, really. I don't even trust him to do anything. So the question we've got to go to, I suppose, is can this damage his re-election? The Trump supporter polling seems to show they just think he's masculine and more virile for all this kind of stuff. It doesn't damage his standing with his base at all. Trump haters already despise him, so it makes no difference to them either. At the moment, Trump is ahead in the polls. Paul says Trump was always an illegitimate president. These payments prove that. But what's interesting in this case is that the judge, to me anyway, the judge has ruled there's no TV coverage. All right. Normally, American courts are pretty often streamed, aren't they? They're all public, so everyone can see what's going on, despite the massive public interest in this. So for once, American courts have to be like the British ones. They're relying on court artists and journalists sort of observing people when they're in the dock or whatever, telling you what's going on. He can't play up to the cameras, although he is still playing up a bit, isn't he, Jeremy, as you said? Do you think if they did let the cameras in, would it be better or worse? I mean, he's already on a final warning for all the contempt that he's been committing. Do you think cameras would make a difference?
Absolutely, yeah, unequivocally. I mean, if that evidence had been on TV yesterday, can you imagine the audience for it and B, the impact of it?
But none of us would be doing any work. We'd just be watching it all day.
Exactly, yeah. It does make a big difference, and I'm a little surprised at that. But then, because of his behaviour in the run-up to it, you might contend that the judge's decision is correct because he's been guilty of contempt 10 times and fined 10 times, and unfortunately that does something for the legal process, doesn't it? So that people watch him and think he's a potential president, and look what he's doing, in a courtroom. Maybe that played into it to a certain extent because of his open contempt for the proceedings. She didn't want that seen by millions and millions of people because of the long-term damage it might do to the inverted commas justice system. But I mean, in terms of, what that would have been yesterday, that would have been prime time viewing, as you've just described, and millions and millions and millions of people would have seen that. And I do think the impact of it would have been far greater, personally.
Yeah, the journalist in me just wants to see it. But the human beings going, maybe it's a good idea not to point the cameras at Trump through some of this. Although I think it may do more to damage his election chances if his voters could see that, he's falling asleep in the middle of the case like all old men would do after lunch. Paul says it's such a proud day for the Trump family. I haven't heard any word from Ivanka yet. Presumably she's still cringing and washing her eyes somewhere. It's astonishing stuff that we're hearing from the court, and there's bound to be more of it. But as Jeremy said, Donald has already been accused of contempt and found guilty of it, actually, quite a few times, been fined by the judge. Carly says he's not going to be elected. He's ruined it all, guilty or not. But guilty is being involved in this scandal is way out of it. There's actually a risk, isn't there, that Trump could go to jail before the case is even finished.
Yes, yeah, and it's quite a real risk, when you think about the seriousness of the charge and the judge's attitude towards it, because he's just basically saying it didn't happen. Now, I don't know. Everybody can make a judgment on her evidence and the detail of her evidence. Does it sound like something that's been completely made up? Personally, I don't think so. But obviously, they're going to have to make their own judgment.
Yeah, and if he keeps coming out and saying things outside the court, which the court has yet to decide upon, then the judge is going to just eventually, as already said, I don't want to jail you because you're a presidential nominee, you're a former president. This is all going to make things very, very messy. Can we just stop being stupid, please? But if he carries on, he's going to have to jail him, and that means Trump in Rikers Island next to Harvey Weinstein. Excuse me. And what impact is that going to have on his base? They've jailed Donald, kind of thing. That would be just play into all their senses of there being some kind of conspiracy. Whereas the Trump haters are going to go, well, of course we can't vote. He's horrible. He's a criminal. We can't possibly vote for him. But the fact that people get accused of things or even get jailed for stuff. Julian Assange fans prove the point there. It doesn't make any damn difference to some of them if they're determined to say what they want to think the best or the worst of someone. So I suppose the question is, where does this go next, right? So this trial is going to try to prove the money was paid in a deliberate attempt to subvert an election. And Trump presumably is going to argue that firstly it didn't happen, but he got his lawyer to do something that was perfectly legal, and it made not a jot of difference. I mean, he would say that his quote from before the election, he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't matter. His voters would still back him. But the question has to be asked: if it made no difference and it didn't happen, then why spend 130 grand on it? It's just, why would you do it then? If she's got no proof and it's a load of rubbish and you think it genuinely makes no difference. And I think what the prosecution has to prove isn't whether or not the money was paid, or it's whether or not it did have an effect on the election. It's the motive. If the motive was to make the election more likely because you've paid the money, then that, I suppose, is probably going to be enough. But then we have a number of other trials, don't we? Not least, there's the one about him fomenting the Capitol Hill insurrection, which resulted in several deaths, a lot of jail time for other people. Excuse me. I blame the biological warfare experiment I live with. But the judge in that case has actually allowed pre-trial arguments, which could delay the insurrection trial until well after the November the 5th election, which is kind of bizarre that we're not having the insurrection trial first. Do you think that would be the big one? That would be the important one. They're having that later. Do you think, I suppose this is a strange question, but do you think America's really going to vote for a president who tried to steal the presidency last time?
I mean, when you see them being interviewed, I think the answer is yes, actually. When you see these fans being interviewed, I don't think they don't seem to have any kind of normal analysis of the individual they're voting for when you see them being interviewed. And obviously, I'm a little bit biased in my view of Trump, as most people on this side of the pond are. They don't use the normal criteria one would use. Otherwise, he wouldn't be anywhere near an election, would he? He wouldn't be anywhere near being a candidate, let alone being the presidential favourite. So I don't think they use the same sort of weights and measures, balances, however one wants to put that, in terms of judgment of his character. Otherwise, he wouldn't be anywhere near it, would he? No, he wouldn't be anywhere near it.
Yeah, the fact that he's even being considered after something like that is kind of astonishing. And Mike says, MAGA fans won't care about this conviction, even though it's essentially misusing money they sent him. It does make you wonder how the evangelical right, though, can still support him. I think that's supposed to be part of the reason that the evangelical right's endorsement is really part of the impact of the fact that it was hushed up in the first place. But we'll have to sort of wait and see how things pan out, won't we? I'm sure there will be more on Stormy today. Unfortunately, we can't all watch the live stream. Otherwise, the Mirror would be running this 24 hours a day.